Hi, Dan Tripp here to talk with you about launching your campaign for public office like a political pro. In today's coaching session, I'm going to walk you through the 4 foundational principles that are found in every successful campaign. Before we dive in though, I want to remind you of a promise I made in a recent email. I promised that I would give you more free stuff than most political shops charge you big monthly retainers for. So if you'll spend the next few minutes with me, I'll teach you the 4 principles that you need to be successful on election day. These principles and this knowledge will help set the strategic course of your campaign and will save you thousands of dollars over the course of the election. Learning these 4 principles will also help you get very focused on strategic work rather than the busy work that consume most campaigns. It's easy to get overwhelmed, trust me. I learned from my own personal campaigns. I was elected to the state legislature in 1994 and served until 2006. And then recently I was just elected to county council in the area that I live in. So that's about 10 general or primary elections that I've been involved with. So I definitely understand being overwhelmed. I understand the challenges that you face in your campaign. Here's one of the secrets I've learned in my years of running for public office. I've learned that you've got to understand the difference between strategies and tactics. Strategies are big picture. They're driven by principles that stand the test of time. Tactics, on the other hand, are day-to-day tasks that help you achieve the strategy. If you get too busy doing the day-to-day tasks, you can lose sight of the big picture principles that you need to win your campaign. That's what I want you to think about as I walk you through these 4 principles that all successful campaigns use. All right, let's walk through the 4 principles that you need to launch your campaign like a pro. All right, Dan Tripp back with you to talk about launching your political campaign like a pro. So how do you launch your campaign like a pro? Well, first, you've got to master the 4 foundational principles that I call the pathway to victory formula. I'm sure you've heard of the term pathway to victory. You hear it in football lingo. You may have heard it on CNN or Fox on a political show. But your campaign's pathway to victory is how you get from where you're at right now to winning the most votes on election day. For our purposes, the pathway to victory formula is based on 4 foundational principles and is the strategic framework that we use to move a group of targeted voters through a voter contact process. And obviously the goal of the process is to win the most votes on election day. Let's spend a few minutes and go through each of the 4 principles in the pathway to victory formula. The first principle is to build a targeted universe of voters. Your campaign has limited resources, so you can't reach everyone. You can't talk to everyone. So you need to build a universe of those voters who are likely to show up in early voting or on election day. Here's a couple pointers on how to build your targeted universe of voters. First, look at past elections. You'll build your target universe by calculating how many voters are likely to turn out in your election based on similar elections. So if you're running for county council, look at past county council elections. If you're running for the legislature, look at past legislative races. And the whole idea is to find out the number of people that have turned out in similar elections in the past. You can find most of this information at archives on the Secretary of State's website in your state, or sometimes that information will be hosted on the county website. Second, past voting history is a very accurate predictor of future voting behavior. So you'll need to dive into the actual voter file and put together a list of folks who have voted in past elections that are similar to yours. I know this sounds a little bit complicated and maybe you don't have a lot of experience working with voter files, but with a little coaching, You'll be able to do a deep dive into the voter file in your district in no time. It's really not that complicated, and we can show you how to do that in a future video. Finally, once you've put together a solid estimate of the number of voters who are likely to show up in your election, you need to develop a win number. This is the number of votes you need in order to win on election day. Usually in a two-person race, it's 50% plus one of those voting. Once you've calculated your win number, you need to use that number to build district-wide and precinct-level vote goals that help you prioritize your strategic and tactical activities. So if you use this first principle and target your resources to voters who will actually show up and vote, you'll end up saving thousands of dollars over the course of your campaign, and you'll have a much more efficient operation. The second principle revolves around a marketing concept called segmentation. You want to identify the candidate preferences of target voters so you can target the right message to the right voter. So always remember, voters are either for you, against you, or they're undecided. If they're for you, ask them to sign up as volunteers, get them to donate or serve on your campaign. Keep them active and engaged. If they're for your opponent, for now just leave them alone. You don't want to spend any resources on stirring up your opponent's supporters, so leave them alone for now. If they're undecided, you need to persuade them to support you. Undecided voters will most likely be your biggest block of voters. These are the voters that you want to spend the most time on, and we'll talk about that in just a minute. Identifying and segmenting your target universe of voters based on their candidate preferences allows you to allocate resources to the right voters. It also allows you to send the right message to the right voters at the right time. So how do you segment your voters? How do you identify their voter preferences and segment the voters? Here's a couple examples to get you thinking about how you do this in your campaign. First of all, when the candidate or volunteers go door-to-door canvassing, voters should always be asked who they support in your election. Their response should be recorded and used strategically down the road in the campaign. So when I go door-to-door as a candidate, I make my pitch about who I am and what I stand for, and then I always close the conversation by asking them, can I count on your vote on election day? And they'll give you a response, yes, no, undecided. Some people don't want to tell you what they're doing, but you can usually glean some information about where they stand. That information needs to be captured on your tablet or on your clipboard that you're using and recorded so that you can use that in strategic ways down the road. Other examples would be phone or mail surveys. You can pay a vendor to do live survey calls and ask folks. You give them a message about the campaign and then ask them where they stand on your campaign. And a lot of times people will tell you yes, no, undecided. You can do the same thing with mail surveys. You can also do digital surveys on your website or your social media platform. A lot of times you can push folks to a landing page that has a couple of survey questions, and you can capture that information for uses on segmentation. These are just a few examples of ways that you can segment your voters. The final point I want to make on the second principle of segmentation is this. When you collect the data from your surveys, whether they be canvassing, phone, digital, whatever, make sure you're collecting that data and using it to inform strategic decisions in your campaign. Remember, I said early, if they're for you, sign them up as volunteers, ask them to donate, keep them active and engaged. If they're for your opponent, leave them alone. If they're undecided, you're going to build a voter contact program around persuading them to support you. The bottom line is this: that data that you collect in all these segmentation methods can be used for programs to help you target to the right voter at the right time with the right message. Make sense? All right, that leads us to principle number 3, which is focus most of your program efforts on persuading undecided voters to support you. The heart and soul of any campaign is a robust voter contact program that is focused on persuading undecided voters. This is the secret sauce of winning campaigns. So how do you do that? First, to build an effective persuasion campaign for undecided voters, you need to have a great message. In most cases, you need a positive, upbeat message, one that attracts voters rather than repels voters. Second, the persuasion campaign will always take time. You need to understand that you'll have to touch the average voter 8 to 15 times with a positive message before you break through the noise of campaigns. This would be, an example of a touch would be standing on their doorstep and telling them about your campaign. Another touch would be a piece of mail or a phone call. All those touches, it takes about 8 to 15 of those touches to break through the noise so that you can start persuading people with your message. So third, you need to start the segmentation process as quickly as you can so you'll have a list of undecided voters to work with. We talked about the segmentation process in the last principle. You need to get that process started as early in the campaign as you can so you can start building a list of undecided voters. And then fourth, you need to build an effective voter contact program that is targetable to the individual level so you can repetitively and persuasively send your message to undecided voters. So what does that mean? So in campaigns, you can push your message out in a variety of ways. There are many different ways to deliver your message. Some people with lots of money use radio and television. The problem with radio and television in small campaigns is you're talking to everybody. It's not a targeted way to deliver your message. So when you're trying to persuade undecided voters, you need to be able to talk to an individual, not a mass of individuals. And in my opinion, there are 4 tools that you can use to build an effective targeted voter contact program. You've heard of these before, and we'll talk about them in future videos, but I call these the 4 campaign power tools, and it's canvassing programs. Nothing is more effective than a candidate going to a doorstep and asking for a vote. So canvassing programs, whether it's the candidate and volunteers. The second tool are direct mail campaigns. You can target a direct mail piece to the individual. The third thing would be digital and social media advertising. It's amazing what we can do now with digital targeting for social media and digital advertising. So that is targetable down to the individual level, and you can use that to persuade your voters. Then phone programs. Again, phone programs can be targeted to an individual or a household, and that is one of the power tools that you can use to build an effective voter contact program, all with the goal of getting your positive message to voters to persuade them to move from being undecided to supporting your campaign. Because you'll spend so much time and money persuading undecided voters, the persuasion piece is the hardest part of the campaign. But if you execute this program effectively, you'll be light years, literally light years ahead of the competition. The fourth and final principle in the Pathway to Victory formula is to make sure you turn out your supporters on Election Day. This is often referred to as your GOTV program. But remember, Don't organize generic turnout programs that reach out to every voter. Always focus your efforts on voters who are supporting you. The primary goal of your Get Out the Vote programs is to turn out your supporters in early voting or on Election Day. And speaking of early voting, more people across the United States are taking advantage of early voting. You've seen all the reports the last several elections about the crowds at polls and people, stand for hours trying to get in and vote. More people are taking advantage of early voting so they can avoid all that. So you've got to have a turnout program that encourages your supporters to get out and vote early or absentee. Now remember, every state and political jurisdiction is different, so you need to know the rules and the important dates for your early and absentee voting. Here are a couple things you need to do as you organize your early voting turnout. First, you need to build your supporter list. Remember earlier when I said you need to make sure you're collecting the voter data and using it to inform strategic decisions in your campaign? You'll need to use the segmentation data that you've collected to build your supporters list for voter turnout efforts. This is one of the key places that you're going to use that segmentation data. All supporters should be pushed hard to get out and vote early. Second, you should start at least a month out and using targeted voter contact programs like we talked earlier, mail, canvassing, phones, to push your supporters to the early voting polls. Imagine getting a live call from the candidate or an actual volunteer that shows up and knocks on your door and asks you to get out and vote early. That's the gold standard of voter contact efforts. Third, you'll want to use social media and digital advertising to remind your supporters to get out and vote early. This could be done on your campaign page, or your Facebook page, or you could buy targeted digital ads for your supporter list. I mentioned earlier that the targeting capabilities in digital advertising are amazing. This means that you can take your supporter list and do an IP match and deliver your persuasion messages or your turnout messages in this case directly to that person. So you definitely want to use social media and digital advertising in your turnout efforts. The fourth thing you'll want to do is set up a paid or volunteer phone program to push your supporters to the polls early. You could use a paid vendor to do a live reminder call. You could also have a prominent leader record a get out the vote call and send out by a robocall. There's a variety of ways that you could set up your phone program, but the bottom line is you want to push those phone calls to your supporters and ask them to help the campaign by getting out and voting early. This is just a quick overview of some of the major turnout programs. Once you've exhausted all your available resources to get your supporters out to vote early, you'll need to turn around and do the same types of turnout activities for Election Day. Your success in turning out your supporters in early voting and on Election Day depends on all the work that you've put in the other three principles that we've talked about. So you've got to make sure you're fully executing all the principles in the Pathway to Victory formula to be successful. They all work hand in glove throughout the course of the campaign. So there you have it. The 4 principles that you can use to launch your campaign for public office like a political pro. As you're putting your campaign together, remember that all your campaign activities should support these 4 principles or strategies. Now, I realize that it's easier said than done. There's a learning curve that you and your team will have to go through to master the art of strategies and tactics in your campaign. But I'm here to help you get through that learning curve. Over the next several weeks, I'll be sending you some follow-up coaching material to help you with the learning curve of your campaign. You should have already received a launch blueprint that shows how your campaign should be organized. We'll also be sending what I call the ultimate guide to the campaign power tools that you need to master in order to win on Election Day. We talked about those earlier. We'll take a deeper dive into those 4 campaign power tools. I'll also be sending some insider tips on raising campaign money online and offline. In all my campaigns, I've always raised my own money online and offline, and I'll give you some tips on how to do that. I've put together some guidance on how to craft your campaign message so you can more adeptly persuade voters to support you. And finally, I'll be sending a quick start guide and a checklist for launching your political campaign. I know I haven't been able to cover every little detail in this short coaching video, but I hope this introduction to the 4 foundational principles will spur your thinking as you launch your campaign for public office. But remember, ideas, plans, even easy to understand strategies are great, but they're also a dime a dozen. Every shop out there has ideas on how to do this stuff. The magic happens when you take these strategies and build your campaign around the ideas contained in this video. Let me repeat that. The magic in your campaign will happen when you take these 4 simple strategies and build your campaign around the ideas in this video. I've used all these powerful campaign strategies in my own campaigns and in my clients' campaigns. I hope you'll dig in and use them, because I guarantee you they'll work for your campaign as well. In closing, can I ask for your help on something? I'd really like to hear from you. Scroll down and leave a comment about the biggest lessons you've learned from the 4 principles we talked about today. Feel free to weigh in on some of the struggles you're facing in your campaign. I'd also love to hear your thoughts or questions about this video. You can leave a message down below, or you can also send an email to dt@launchyourpoliticalcampaign.com. That's dt@launchyourpoliticalcampaign.com. Thanks so much for your time today. I look forward to hearing from you soon.